Hi, Hank. Or I should say, Pak Hank. Lovely to see
Hey,
you.
good to see you. Yeah.
Hello,
Hi.
Pak Heng. How are you? Nice to meet you.
Hey,
Yeah.
good to see you. How are you? Oh,
Great.
wow. It's nice to
Has
see you
been
again.
quite some
It's
time,
been a
yeah, Pak
while.
Heng?
Yeah, it's been
Yes.
some more time. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How are you?
Good. And thank you for allocating your tight schedule for
Of course.
this lecture.
Yeah. It's early. Yeah. Yeah. New York is still a little bit waking up.
Yeah. So it's 7:30. I think we can just start, right? Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah. Let me check. Yeah, so Pak Neville, we can start, yeah.
Please.
Everybody who already joined on the Zoom meeting, please allow me to start our lecture series tonight. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who already been here in our Zoom platform. I'm happy to start our lecture series on the Nusantara Planning and Design Competitions, Evolutionary Planning of the Capital Habitat 45, or we used to say it as EPOCH45, part of collaborations between the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, Diponegoro University, with our colleague from the Marsh Architect, Pak Neville Marsh, and also with the support from the Netherlands government, from the embassy, and also from the ADB. And for tonight, it's very special for us because we have our very special guest from the Netherlands who very used to a lot of experience on water-related issues. Pak Heng Oving. Later on, Pak Neville will introduce you more. I just want to give intro that for us from Indonesia, particularly from Semarang, we are really familiar with your concept, so-called as water as leverage. I don't know what in specifically what will you talk about for our lecture tonight, but as a part of the yeah Nusantara competition, I believe your innovative ideas on water-related issues will be very fruitful for the participants. Last information that I got from the team, it already more than 40 teams, register for our competitions across the globe from different countries. And happy to know that you also will be part of the jury. So we do really look forward to have a very innovative idea for our new capital. And yeah, with this, I would like to hand it over to Pak Neville, who will moderate the sessions, and look forward to have your lecture too. Please, Pak Neville.
Thank you, Pak Vivek. That's a great introduction. I will keep it very short and rather abstract tonight, if you don't mind. First off, it's great, Hank. I hope we can have this tradition where we see each other at least every 10 years. Honestly, that would be wonderful. More is better. The role that you have fulfilled over the last, well, more than a decade is rather complex and truly unique. And it is extremely hard to kind of summarize what that is, other than that it is solely focused and revolves around water. The only thing I want to kind of posit here now, and you can fully disagree, that's maybe for the Q&A, is that's a really kind of a daring and quite a unique and interesting proposition to have an ambassador for water for one item, because we are all trying to promote integrated planning. We're trying to promote cross-scalar and even a sort of temporal approach to planning. So how does it work if we highlight one aspect from so many that are critical to planning? And it seems to me that water has that binding factor. It is certainly cross-scalar as it flows through all these different strata, through different territories. But it's also the weird kind of unique binding factor of many different specialisms. And that's maybe something that will come forward in your presentation, or you will brutally disagree with me, and that would be wonderful for the Q&A as well. With that open-ended question, again, really lovely to see you, and I look forward to hearing your presentation, Henk. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Wiwi and Neville, and thanks all for joining. And it's great to see you indeed. And let's not keep the 10-year tradition. Let's shorten it at least. And it's been long, Wiwi, but not that long ago since we met. And it's a good question, Neville, and I hope with what I will explain on the issue of water, I will be able to show you why it is different and why it's so central to our design capacity and design culture, so much needed in the context of integrating the challenges in a manner that is also inclusive, that touches upon these issues of equity, sustainability, and resiliency, and where design and water actually become partners to a certain extent. There's a little bit more to that. Okay, I'll share my screen. Yeah. Here we are. I hope you can see this.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'll take you away a bit. Okay. And water, we have to start to understand, and I hope at the end of my talk you will have a better understanding of why that focus is so key, but also how it is an entry to an alternative way of looking at the challenges and the future, because that is necessary. If we look around, and I'll explain more, in everything we do, that alternative is lacking. So we're set to fail. So Nusantara has that opportunity to show that there is another way towards a future. But around the world, we are not embarking on that alternative. And it means a combined effort, where it's about deliberation, research, understanding, capacity, diplomacy, and partnerships, novel ways in ways of dealing with one another, and of course design as a driver for that innovative, transformative capacity. Now, why water? You could say on one hand, my talk will be about this planet, where there's always this talk about, hey, it's a blue planet. It's even called a blue planet, a blue marble. Some people around the world now mock the fact that there's too much, or there's always an abundance, and we can focus on that aspect. And sometimes I showed an image then when you take a big vacuum cleaner, you take all the water of the world, it's still a marble, it's still a sphere. There are no holes. It's not a Swiss cheese. I don't want to go there, but I just want to make sure that the fact that it looks that a lot, it doesn't mean it's not vulnerable. That there is a need to understand, and we do know this. Although my talk won't be a lot about that, but we do know that half of the world's population, so that's 4 billion people, lack access to water, sanitation, and hygiene in one capacity or the other. The numbers are really challenging, and they differ quite a bit. But for sure, over 2 billion people, so a quarter of the world's population, and probably more, probably closer to 3 some numbers even say more, do not have access to safe drinking water. And that means that predominantly women and girls walk the wells for hours, do not, because of that, have access to school, education, or workforce, put their lives at risk while doing so. And hygiene and sanitation facilities lack for even larger numbers, undermining the safety and security for close to half of our population. So just think about that. This is 2025. This is not 1900s or before. The second part of water is what we know is how it gets us with floods and droughts and wildfires. And I can put on slides of all the years, including 2025, with storms and droughts, and that's really better and undermined. But we have to understand why it happened. This is the result of our failures, and it starts with understanding where water comes from and how it matters for our life. And we count on water, right? We drink it, even if it comes in a bottle, if there is not a well that we can trust. Especially in the places where there's water infrastructure, we use it in abundance. And we really think there is always enough. And if we zoom out and we see our plants, oh yeah, there's always enough. But we're changing that singular source of fresh water, and counting on water is no longer the case. Water demand is going up with increased population and economics of the charts. And at the same time, the availability of the same fresh water, because of mismanagement, over abstraction, pollution, but also our economics, the way we value, treat, and govern anything around water is key. So I'll try to talk about that. We know this planet with our oceans, but if you look closer, you see water that goes beyond our imagination, that is floating through the sky. And the question is, where does it come from and where does it go? And this is where the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, I'm the executive director of, so I lead it together with a large group, including President Tarman from Singapore, Dr. Ngozi Okonye-Iweala from the World Trade Organization, and Marianne Mazzucato and Johan Rockström, and 19 other commissioners from around the world, have focused and dedicated our last years on understanding how this hydrological cycle works and why it matters so much, that understanding, valuation, and then governance for everything we value. And for me, how it relates to design and planning, how it relates to imagining these alternatives. So the hydrological cycle, you have to imagine as literally as a cycle where if you look at this slide, we often around the world only focus on the right part, only on this part of the slide, where we think, oh, water falls from the sky, it sits in our rivers, lakes, it goes into our groundwater, our aquifer, there's runoff into our ocean. And then we have evaporation, a little bit back to land, most of it to the ocean, and that's about it. But if we take a closer look, turns out that over half of the rain on land, the water that we feel when it rains, does not come from evaporation, but it comes from transpiration. And transpiration comes from our environment, our biodiversity, our soils and subsoils, our plants, our trees, our biodiversity compact for that matter. And that is what we call green water, the transpiration. And to simplify this, it actually means if you occupy a piece of land, if you turn it from nature to agriculture or to city, or you cut a tree, you take away the source of rain. And this is what's been happening over the last decades and centuries, is that we, not only because of over abstraction, pollution and mismanagement, but because of land degradation, massive agriculture and industrialization. So the change of land, we cut the source of that fresh water that we so much need for our survival and for a stable hydrological cycle. So you have blue water, as we call it. On the right is the water that we know, which we normally talk about. But the green water is half of that water flow and water stock, critical important. Now, this hydrological cycle is out of balance for the first time in human history. And the relationship with, as I said, biodiversity, but also climate change of water, make it a disruptive capacity for our economies and society. Combination with climate change is that this transpiration is also emissions and contributing to climate change. And on top of that, with every degree warming, as you see, there's more water vapor in the atmosphere, much more, and that is supercharging freak events we already know with droughts and floods and storms and anything that comes with it. So the fact that the hydrological cycle is out of balance, that the way we change and disrupt land use immediately impacts everything in our society, because everything depends on it. Now, this is true on, you could say, the local scale and also on the regional scale. We've calculated how these precipitation and evaporation shed, so where water comes from and where it goes, how they work. But if we zoom out, it turns out that these flows of water connect us across the world. And there's an interdependency that is geopolitically often challenging, but I see it as an opportunity, because the fact that we're connected is the way forward for partnerships and collaboration. And looking at the map, and you can find it all online. You can zoom in your country and see where does your rain come from and where does it go. But it tells you that these evaporation sheds connect us across the globe, and that part of our rain in Africa comes from Latin America, in China comes from Europe, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're connected, and that connectivity comes with a responsibility. Of course, we zoomed in on certain regions, but that's a little bit too far for now. So we're changing the source of fresh water because of mismanagement and pollution, but also land use mismanagement, biodiversity loss, and degradation of land, and climate change, and the assumption that we can counter water is no longer true. This green water, this transpiration capacity is key for the supply of precipitation, and the interdependency of water with everything else is a critical factor of achieving what we want to achieve. And that interdependency we calculated with the Commission, where we see how blue and green water are literally part of every sustainable development goal. So every sustainable development goal, if it's about cities, land, health, equity, economic productivity, food, of course, is dependent on a stable hydrological cycle. And that stability is out of balance. So water insecurity, climate change, and biodiversity loss are critically linked. And if we look at the agreements that we have on these, there is the possibility for a shared agenda. But the impact of a destabilized hydrological cycle comes with a cost. And that's a cost that we often calculate in GDP, so in how our economies work. And we estimate that impact on the long term goes to 8 to 15% of our GDPs globally. In addition, there are social costs that come with increased inequality and environmental costs with the degradation of land. So that's the larger story of our green and blue water. We did a little bit of an estimate on our water footprint. So before I go to how we are going to deal with this, it's perhaps a staggering fact, not something to do something with it now, but just to put in your mind, is that World Health Organization says we need a minimum, everyone needs a minimum of 50 liters of water per day. That's on a, you could say on the individual scale, on a human scale. But if we see on average with the 8 billion people that we have on our planet, how much water we actually use for our life, for industry, for food, for our clothes, our cars, our homes, our roads, our whatever, we use 4,000 liters per person per day. And that water is just not available. So the fact that we can't count on water means that we're undermining our industry, our food security, our energy security, our production, and therefore our jobs, our security at large, and social stability. And that, you could say it's not always apparent. We only feel water insecurity when we have these massive events, a flood, a longer drought, wildfires, and we link that immediately to too much water or a lack of water. And when it's about health impacts, you can think about the pollution of water. But it's a slow but devastating disaster that's creeping up upon us, and that instability of the hydrological cycle is undermining achieving all of the sustainable development goals. Now, with the Global Commission, we took that knowledge and science and said, but we can change course. There is the opportunity for that alternative. And we identified 5 missions in the context of the challenges and our economy. 1 on food, 1, of course, on biodiversity and land use, 1 on a circular economy, 1 on the energy transition and the need for water security in that, all the way to AI and data center, and of course 1 on health. And we mapped these 5 missions against levers, partnerships, finance, data, and governance to get us on track. So it's a little bit like a super short summary of the work I've been working on over the last years to get a better understanding of how much water means. And it taps into this call to action by Secretary General Guterres and our collective understanding that science is key. We need to be able to understand, but we also need to embark on this understanding in a very collaborative and a collective manner, in an inclusive manner. So science and solidarity are also at the heart of this commission. It's the 3rd economic review after Stern and Dasgupta. But I did not want an only research approach. I brought together over 20 commissioners from across the world, a youth activist from Kenya, and other activists in their 80s, former ministers, presidents of a General Assembly, scientists, private sector partners, community leaders, indigenous, from across the world to work together with as many people as possible to ensure that the science was deliberated and discussed, and that citizen science and science that come from sources that are not books are as part of that deliberation as the ones that we get from our satellites. So a collective effort to understand it. Science is key. And the relationship to water is a need in the context of understanding why planning and design are helpful in moving forward with this inclusive approach. Water is not a single focus. It is bringing together every aspect of our sustainable agenda, every aspect of resiliency, sustainability, and equity. So it's not that you see water as a sector that can be dealt with by engineers, by building pipes and facilities. No, if you look at our economy, society, and our environment through a water lens, you start to understand the foundational capacity water brings, stable water cycle brings, in achieving our ambitions, our goals. And 2019 the IPCC Climate Change and Land Report already made that link between water and planning, and I think that's a little bit where I want to go next. It's a report that you see it in the middle. It's a little bit, you see it also hidden behind the 21 report. It was also a little bit forgotten. And reasons why it came after the 1.5 degree that showed the devastating impact of the difference between the Paris Agreement and our Paris ambition. 2 degree agreement, 1.5 ambition. The cryosphere report, which of course countries like Indonesia and the Netherlands and others need to understand, because it links to the issue of sea level rise and anything in its relationship to climate and cryosphere. But the Climate Change and Land Report is the handbook of design. You can read the policy summary, and it tells us that, my summary, so I won't do the report right because it's massive research over years by many researchers, but it tells us that the majority, over 99% of our global investments increase climate change. So the way we develop our economy and the way we abuse our waters and environment is increasing climate change, more emissions, more degradation. And at the same time, not only more climate change, but also more vulnerability, because we destroy, and here it taps back into how water is linked to our redundancy, resiliency, sustainability, and equity. It destroys exactly that single factor that could help us present an alternative for the future. So that double whammy is explained very well in this report. Read it. And the reason why, and I've said this before, is that if we look at the future, everything is more becoming more complex. Challenges are in the rise, and our economic models just fail us. The way we evaluate and validate our investment is based on stupidity, short-term profits, and not longer-term gains and values. There's a business case for that stupidity because it delivers you a profit on the short term, but it makes us more vulnerable on the midterm already with every dollar we spend. So we have to change course. We have to move from a non-responsive way where we just invest based on our single focused interest, and where we find ourselves is a disastrous world where every day we have to respond. And this is the reality for policymakers, communities, and partners around the world, is that we respond to everything that's happening to us. So from non-responsive to reactive means a very busy, you can be very busy but being, responding to the disaster. You even can feel good about it. I worked my ass off today in responding to the things that matter. But because our policies, our validation and evaluation models and our regulations are based on the past, where we come from, and not based on the future, where we want to go, that means that any response is anchored in that past and will increase our vulnerability and the destructive capacity of those response efforts. So if we don't change course and become proactive, then we lose. Now, I explained how water plays that critical role in every sustainable development goal, in anything across our society. And if we understand that capacity, figure out how to value this, and connect it to governance and management, there are ways forward. But it links to design, and it links to how water is more or less a mirror of design capacity, where design by design is anchored in the need for looking at that longer term in a very holistic manner. Neville said it. And the design approach is about taking into account social, environmental, and economic challenges in this holistic, comprehensive manner. Design can be anchored in that short term. That long term is informing short term, often catalytic interventions that help us set on track. If only we do this inclusively, and this is where design fails us, because design by in the hands of the ones that are single focused is not done in this massively inclusive and collaborative manner, and transparency and accountability often lack. So be able to learn from mistakes, but also the things that go well. So the combination between that long-term, mission-oriented, comprehensive approach and short-term interventions that get us on track with partnerships, collaborative capacity, in an everyday 24/7 inclusive approach that is transparent and accountable to help us change our validation and evaluation mechanism, that can build a capacity that is institutional, that is individual, but it is also informal, that is in everything. And design in this, looking one step deeper, plays that role of getting us on track. It's solution-oriented, in its innovative, catalytic, and pragmatic manner. It looks across scales, times, and interest, all these silos that we created, building opportunity. Yeah. But there's a level of design that we lack, you could say, and this is often across science and scientific approaches or policy and political approaches, where design can become political, is that it taps into the future, a future that you could almost now say need to dare to want, to aspire for. This is where design brings aspiration and inspiration. This is where it's building that narrative, that alternative that we can put on the table, that it is also something that we want. And I think here the combination between a design approach that is anchored in that understanding of a hydrological cycle and how it relates to everything social and equity, everything financial and economic, everything environmental, everything industrial, everything societal, everything individual and communal, everything, how these links help us build solutions that are holistic and that show us the way forward. Missions that we have the guts and the capacity to embark on. But design then needs a process. Design does not come easy, you could say. It takes time. And the time better be invested in an approach where we create a space that literally is safe. And I quote Almending and Autumn sometimes, where they did research on soft spaces, which are actually physical areas. But the way they say that deliberate attempts are made to introduce new innovative ways of thinking. A safe space this is where design links to diplomacy and deliberation. Is a safe space where you bring those voices together. Where if we talk about the capacity to connect, you have to create an environment for that capacity to connect, bridging silos. And today, it's at least more apparent in our faces that is harder. But you could say 10 years ago, it was as hard, but perhaps less in our face. But the differences are, all over the place. You don't need to read the news to understand that the challenge to overcome our differences or accept our differences and work with them is increasingly more vulnerable. These are images from Rebuild by Design as we worked in New York. But there is, momentum and urgency. I'm critically failing myself here because I say now that we don't need a crisis because crisis kill too many people from around the world. But it's a fact of life that we have this. So my story on post-Sandy recovery. I'm in New York. I see now the projects being built. We developed a challenge in the context of this massive disaster. We embarked on a process of bringing the world together, the world of communities, over 500 organizations in over 140 neighborhoods with everyone we could bring together, developing those, and we're implementing them now. But also for time constraints, and as we're not in New York but in Asia, I want to talk a little bit about, and also because it it relates very much to the work of the Commission on the work that we developed with a large group of partners in Asia, and we called it Water as Leverage. Really seeing water as a lever for that catalytic transformation that we so much need, a lever to, in its combination, in its marriage with design capacity, the process, and the opportunity, water could be a driver for developing that alternative. And we started with understanding, nothing new here, to really figure out the challenges in the context of economic, social, and environmental futures in Southeast Asia, Southeast Asia. Mapping hotspots where the combination of those challenges showcased opportunities, because the stacking of these challenges drive a holistic and comprehensive approach. The stacking of these challenges not only spotlight current day urgency, but also longer term necessity to deal with it. And embarking on an approach where we literally brought the world together in these places to build on this understanding in the ambition, but also with the conviction that we could develop alternatives together, if only we did this together. So setting up shop literally in the streets of Chennai in India, Koolhaas in Bangladesh, and Semarang in Indonesia. We already talked about it. And you see the 3 cities on this map. We assessed more, but we choose 3 cities and challenged 6 teams, 2 per city, to help us understand the complexity of these challenges and identify a way forward. I will deep dive in one non-Indonesian city, which is Chennai, because the example is so exemplary for the way I think we can. It's the work done by UUS and the UUS team, which is a group of over 30 partners. More than half of them come from Chennai. And they did an assessment on how Chennai's current is tapped into an unsustainable future, how the undervaluation of water as a critical source, resource, and foundation for anything life, economy, and the environment in Chennai has been abused. And that is now undermining that same future with increased risks, vulnerability, and massive impacts on economy, inequality, and resiliency and sustainability. So on the left, you see the current state of play in Chennai, where in the monsoon time, a shorter period of time every year with more rain, but with a city that looks like this, where the surface is hardened and urbanized and water streams are no longer functioning, that water is polluted. If you're lucky, there's a bit flowing back into the aquifer. Most of it is going into the ocean. And Chennai is a city where surface water rivers are distributing the water across the city and towards the ocean, and where in the old days, a little embankment in that river, a little dam or dike or an obstruction, you could say, could already provide you the capacity to survive, to build your farm around, your community around. And these tanks, these places of where holding water became religious places, where water was kept. A temple was built next to it, beautifully designed. Literally the water from streams and rain was brought as a way to celebrate, but also recharging the aquifer. So there was a system when Chennai was small to live with water and value water, but also manage and govern water with public space, infrastructure, and nature-based solutions. No longer the case with this massive growth, massive urbanization, and massive undervaluation of water. With the team assessed there is an alternative. This is that future on the right, where if we would be able to value again the surface water in its relationship to groundwater and all the flows, there would be more than enough water for a city like Chennai to flourish. But because the system is broke, the city now borrows money from lenders like the World Bank and the Japanese, building desalination plants. Desalination are larger infrastructure plants that use ocean water. And it's actually a cover-up word because it's not desalination, but these plants take everything out of the water, including the things that we can call salt, but pollution in massive amounts. And the water that's left over is actually poor in quality, so we have to add nutrients and the other good things that normally sit in water to be able to do something valuable with it. So that fabricated water then sits in these plants and has to be distributed across the city with trucks, often because infrastructure is failing. Diesel plants are fossil fueled, coal, so that means they have a massive carbon footprint. They come at a cost because it's a massive investment and energy consumption is off the chart. So increasing that for a city, increasing a carbon footprint, but also increasing an environmental risk because the leftover, what's left over after desalination is called brine, and that brine is toxic because it's not only salt, it's often with these older desalination plants also hot in temperature, but it has everything from microplastics and anything larger all the way to the salt that it's actually taking out. And that brine is often just thrown back into the ocean, creating underwater graveyard. I'm not against desalination, but in the context of Chennai, then desalination is totally unnecessary. If you live on a small island state or somewhere in a super arid region, desalination is your way of survival. And currently we're embarking on novel technologies that use way less energy, deal with the brine in a better way, are sustainable at lesser cost. There's all these opportunities, but when we have water, we better treat it, reuse and value it, reduce our use, reuse and recycle, and value it accordingly. And here in Chennai, there is definitely no need to abuse our water, because investing in nature-based solutions for that alternative, for that future that we want, as you see on the right, works. By focusing on restoring those historic tanks, building new tanks, reforest the city, renaturalize canals, build new bioswales, restore wetlands and construct news, and focus on solid and liquid waste recycling, as well as in our urban environment. With this set of intervention and valuing how we used to value water right, we can, by design, tick all these boxes of these sustainable development goals and use water literally as a lever to improve our environment, our resiliency and sanitation, health, our economies, and biodiversity, develop opportunities for local businesses, focus on our past as well as on our future, cut carbon massively, and improve an environment. And one example we built, we started in one part of the city around the school, and we used the school as an anchor for capturing the water for the community, rainwater harvesting, as well as wastewater, bringing it back to a facility that was nature-based, where water was treated in multiple layers, and then recharged in the aquifer, monitored online, so monitoring facilities, ensuring that everybody could see what was actually happening to that water. And it's a playground, a school's playground that celebrates nature and water as a way to deal with with floods, with droughts, with pollution, and showcase as an example, when it rains or when there's a drought, that water is secured. An example that is very small scale, but in the Indian tradition can be scaled up and in that sense leveraged across with other infrastructure investments and development, not only in Tamil Nadu, but across India. One example. Well, Vivi, this is Semarang, you know. You've been part of that journey. I won't talk a lot about Semarang and our solutions. I wanted to show Chennai in detail, but what we did in Semarang and in Kulna was more or less the same. Assessed the city and its context of floods, of droughts, of pollution, of subsidence, of urban development, figured out where interventions were necessary across the city, up the hills, along the rivers and the canals, in the industrial and complex, as well as in where the people live, focusing on benefits that come with securing water for that city, looking beyond water at heat, at biodiversity, at energy, at agriculture, the economy at large, as well as the healthy communities and the opportunities for that city, and thinking across different perspectives. The channels that actually killed the rivers could be massive opportunities in this context of interventions across the city. The same we did in Kulna, where water is a way of life. We had to zoom in and out a smaller city across the whole Bangladesh Delta to find interventions in that system that would build indeed the foundation for the alternative development for a city that embraces that water cycle to store and reuse, but also build resiliency and capacity. Water is leverage created, like Rebuild by Design, an alternative opportunity to bring together the many stakeholders and partners in a co-development capacity. And we think, I think we all think that these type of approaches, like what you're embarking now on with the Nusantara challenge, are opportunities to again stabilize that hydrological cycle. I'll show you one example of an assessment on how this works from a non-Asian context, a non-American context, which is Europe, and that was also done by UZ in the context of an exhibit in Hamburg that is now in Zurich and moving to Vienna, that is about the culture of water, and where the team of UZ, Eva and Sylvain, were given the opportunity to think across Hamburg's water vulnerability. They were asked by the director of the museum where the exhibit was held to think about the museum. You see the museum here on the left as a water positive, you could say almost water positive tool for the city. But Eva and Sylvain said that is impossible in its isolation. You have to look at it across scales. You have to look at that building in the context of the city or the direct environment, the city, as well as the whole Elbe, which is the whole river, you could say. And they did a deep dive and presented that deep dive. You can see it in the hallway, where the whole river basin, as well as these evaporation sheds, these green water flows, were taken into account. And I show this because we often forget. We often are confronted with single focused questions, do something on this scale. But while design has the capacity to tap into everything across sectors, silos, interests, across time, across scales, that solution orientation and the link to the question often limits our capacity and ability to overcome those biases where we give answers to stupid questions. And our society is founded in the stupidity of these questions. We don't challenge those questions, design doesn't matter. And I think here the relationship between design and water is, again, Eva and Sylvain proved also here in the Hamburg context, is of critical importance to understand where our vulnerabilities lie, our interdependencies across these scales, sectors, interests, and cultures, and where alternatives can be founded on and developed that show pathways towards a future. Alternatives that help us understand where we had to go. Now, I think for you could say for now, in the context of what I wanted to share, I'm going to round this up with some last remarks. There is, as you heard, no silver bullet, and all of these challenges are not easy, but there's a necessity in the context of the massive challenges we face. And there is, next to a local and national, perhaps even regional effort, also a global effort. And I think I go back to, again, this hydrological cycle and its relationship of, and our interdependencies that we share around the world, that if water is, and green and blue are so fundamental for everything we do, and design can bring that capacity to help develop water futures that are alternatives and help us embark on development pathways that bypass the current geopolitical and political and sectoral and financial and economic lock-ins that we face. There is this link, and I was the driver together with Sultan Rahim Zodo for the second ever UN conference on water in 2023. The image of Guterres was from 2019, but the words are from 2023 here. This is at the conference. The positioning water at the center of the global political agenda. That is his understanding. It's not easy, and we're trying our best, but it's not easy. And I think the combination of this global effort with this the locality of our interventions could be a good match. This is the QR code to the report on the economics of water, watercommission.org. It's very easy. I leave you with the book I wrote on Rebuild by Design, because those lessons are, I think, not so much about the book, but about the lessons I learned, and I try to message across, is that the challenges are massive, but there is a real opportunity to embrace them, not simplify them, develop those spaces that are safe, to do it together, and use design as a power to develop that alternative. So I think if I had to redraft those messages, I think I would have started with the fact that the alternative is the way that we should develop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henk. That was both very inspiring and quite daunting. Allow me to kind of hijack your presentation to make a general point to all the registrants of the competition. You end on the note of no silver bullets. Complexity is something to be embraced, and that seems to be very difficult for many planners that come from a more engineering-oriented background. I would go as far as to say that kind of echoes your comment on dumb infrastructure that does one thing really well, a highway or a dam, but doesn't really integrate within all these complexities. So I would make one point to all the entrants, like, don't be taken aback. Sink your teeth in. There is indeed also for Nusantara, there is no silver bullet. We know that. But there is a process-oriented approach that that will definitely help us to follow a better trajectory, as we saw in the beginning of this presentation. I have a long list of questions, but I think I'll only do a few, and hopefully then, meanwhile, the chat box will fill up with some additional questions. So one is quite cheeky, and the current climate is not ideal. I think we will all agree, because the type of project that you describe, and I fully support that, is a bottom-up project that has top-down support. I think that's generally the success story of these type of projects. And now the top-down support in much of the world is faltering. So I'm wondering, what is the next step if you don't have the backing from institutions, from governments? What can planners do?
It's a good question. I think it is as easy that there is a bottom-up process with a top-down support. I think the bottom-up process provoked a top-down support. So, for example, Rebuild by Design came without top-down support. I remember when developing Rebuild by Design for the Obama administration task force, we were the laughingstock of the task force, but kept alive more or less because we were stubborn, a little bit crazy and foreign, and we were kept alive in the appendices of a draft report, until all of a sudden it turns out that the approach that we developed, because of that bottom-up anchoring in communities, in agencies, in institutions beyond the top-down, created almost a truth that was not to be overseen anymore. So, I think, and that is that was in the context of a very welcoming top-down environment, although the bureaucracy connected to that was against our effort. I still remember the day when I had to present Rebuild by Design to the Task Force Steering Committee, and everybody said, Henk, prepare yourself, this is going to be the last presentation on Rebuild by Design, because it's going to get killed. It was not. And so, and this had to do with the conviction by two people that this was the right way forward against all odds. Secret, I can now share publicly, is that when we started Rebuild by Design, we said we're going to embark on this journey. We had the support of philanthropy, we had the support of communities, we had the support of many stakeholders, we had the support of the federal government. But it was also very clear, the White House at that time said, you will get no guarantee on funding the project because we have no clue. We don't want no involvement. It is too vulnerable for political engagement. Only after we presented the results, we were able to negotiate the first 1 billion and then another billion for the implementation of the project. We never told anyone that we never had that guarantee for implementation. So we embarked a little bit bluntly into this space where we said there is top-down support. The top-down support was very vulnerable. So navigating this space is always complex. As an example to the chance, an example from Brazil. President Lula is not in love with water. He embraces biodiversity and the opportunity and its relationship to climate, the Amazon and indigenous culture. But water presents him with a challenge, and that is transboundary. And transboundary means that you have to work together across political and geopolitical geographies. We now present them with the opportunity that because of a transboundary approach, where we look at the full river basin and the hydrological cycle at a larger scale, to come up with an investment program that adds $400 million to the Amazon forest. So what I'm saying is that systems approach becomes a financial and investment opportunity to invest in futures for individuals beyond political divide. More and more are we capable than before that these holistic systemic approaches that stem in these pillars of social, environmental, economic, cultural, and political divide, that if we bring them together, present investment opportunities. So while our infrastructure can be stupid, the models that led us to those infrastructure stupidity are changing. Why? Because the risks are piling up for those dollars. Financial and private sector, public and private sector financial partners, more and more understand that without the systems approach, the dollars on the short term will fail. So I think the pressure on the system is so large that there is an opportunity that alternative, even in the current political, local, regional, national, and geopolitical context, is an alternative investors with a lack of political savvy are willing and able to look for, because they don't have a choice. And simple in the US, in Florida, it's hard to get your mortgage in a floodplain. So you don't need to believe in climate change. This is the case. The Rebuild by Design program now is a 501c3, an NGO. We came up with an atlas of disaster that is now an atlas of accountability, where we showed that almost every county in the US has suffered from a federally declared disaster. Republican counties more than Democrats, not because climate change hates Republicans more than Democrats, but because that is a reality. And that means that looking at that future, we can't politicize climate. We don't even need to talk about it. But the fact that communities suffer demands that we invest in that. And that political relationship between where your constituency comes from and where there is a need relates more and more to the challenges and relates more and more to its complexity. So I think the pressure is so massive that systems approach and the fact that we can present an alternative, this is where we are part of the solution. And I think that is super helpful. Beyond the politics, we all want to see where we can go. And I think this is where our responsibility comes. If we're able to show those alternatives, put them on the table, they almost become no regrets in their complexity and the challenge that they face. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying that
right. No,
there is an opportunity.
I have a very short follow-up question, which is, are institutions like the World Bank and UN Habitat, are they actually strategically moving away from heavy infrastructure, mainly road building as the foundation of urbanization? Because that was still the mantra at UN Habitat 3, which I found rather shocking.
Yeah, so I think Ajay Banga, the president of the World Bank, gets it. And it doesn't mean that all of a sudden the money moves away. As I said, if half of the world's population still lacks access to safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene facility, infrastructure is also part of the solution, and we can't avoid it. If we don't have a bus or a rail to ride on, infrastructure is still part of the things that we have to develop. So infrastructure in itself is not the enemy. It's the validation and evaluation models that presented with stupid infrastructure. So I think we have to be careful that we all of a sudden say, oh, we don't need infrastructure anymore. We do. We do need that infrastructure. But the intelligence and the inclusivity and the holistic way of development, as well as the mission that we embark on, where we anchor those infrastructure investments on, need to be developed too. And I think it's this match. So I think I'm not saying that all of a sudden the things are becoming sunny, but I do think that there is a change, that the portfolio of interventions becomes more colorful. Not to say that all of a sudden everything should move away from infrastructure, but that you could say there is an appetite to diversify that portfolio. We have to show that it works. And this is also where, especially in the context of multilateral, if we don't increase the capacity on the side of where the question comes from, so the country that wants the loan or the grant from the multilateral, if that question is not becoming more intelligent, more system grounded, then the money goes still to stupidity. So, and I think here again, a lesson the World Bank puts into practice is more than ever they're investing in capacity building. Right. And I think you need $1 million to spend $1 billion wisely. So we need trillions to be able to spend our quadruple trillions more wisely, focusing on people, institutions, and partnerships. So beyond the institution, it's critical for an enabling environment that is able to develop alternatives. And I think the more we spend there, the better the questions will become, the more possible it is that the changing validation and evaluation models will prefer investment into these sustainable, equitable, and resilient solutions. But capacity first, and I think this is where you see a shift. It's also, I think, where UN agencies and multilaterals are partnering more and more with NGOs and communities and private sector and governments to say, hey, if we don't have the institutions, our money goes to waste. And the institutions are made by people. If we don't have the people that actually can populate those institutions, and if we can't develop the partnerships across these institutions, we see failing intervention. So while it might be a risk-driven approach, where does my money go to waste? There is an increased understanding that without that capacity, it doesn't work. I'm not saying this is the case everywhere and the whole time, not at all. We still do, in majority, the stupid things. But there is a light where that focus on people, partnerships, and the institutions that come with it, the level of transparency and accountability, and the mechanisms that increase that, and the investments in these approaches that are as best as can inclusive. I think this horizontal layer of an enabling environment creates the opportunity for more longer term oriented short-term intervention.
I think that is an approach, capacity building, certainly, that is very valid in Indonesia. I would I will take some questions, but I would like to make it a bit more specific as well to the site. We have our phase 1 of Nusantara, designed by Pak Sofian. Rather a beautiful plan, and quite water sensitive. He's developing mainly on the top of the hills and leaving the valleys at peace, which means the water flows are relatively uninterrupted. So that's a great starting point. Now for the rest, the other 70% of the land for the next 20 years. I'm somewhat concerned that it's hard to communicate these softer solutions, nature-based solutions. We're dealing, for instance, in Nusantara with this contradiction of having both drought and flooding almost at the same time, which I'm sure you've encountered in many places. And in that kind of setting, it's very hard to tell people, well, a soft coastal refurbishment is going to save the day. People like to see something hard, something solid, something immediate. So the communication, is that a kind of an important component of your strategy?
Yeah, of course. And I think as you say, the extremes become more extreme and more connected. And this is all over the world. Europe, I mean, New York, but Europe faces increasingly extremes, more floods and more droughts at the same time. We have floods in the dry season and droughts in the wet season, and then the combination of both. And it's happening everywhere. So our destruction of our natural capital, the hydrological cycle out of balance, and climate change as a magnifier on everything is showcasing those changes. And for lack of a better approach, that resiliency approach is of critical need for survival. It has to be paired with literally curbing emissions and changing a future. It's not enough to prepare yourself for a daunting future, because that future with those preparation methodologies based in our current policies will only become more daunting if we're only focusing on adaptation. We die tomorrow. So it's without adaptation we die today, without mitigation we die tomorrow. So you need both. So there literally is a case. To your question on how to on the necessity of bringing that understanding in the everyday practices. Yes, I think the way how to communicate and connect and set up these partnerships is key. It's not. I think I'm not sure for Nusantara, but across the world, the understanding of how it works, paired with a process of capacity building and engagement, and focusing on partnerships across all these divides, local and international, left and right, public and private, community and not, is key, because you bring together a multitude of voices that by themselves never would come together. And I think this is not about building friendships. This is about building partnerships across divides that have a common interest. And that common interest is a future where there is a value to invest in, to live in, to raise your kids in. So grounded in that future orientation, partnerships matter. And they overcome lock-ins that we often face. But it's not all of a sudden that you can build one partnership and then you're done. I think there is more an understanding that it will be a multitude of partnership in an environment of missions that we constantly have to orchestrate. I think this is where we are challenged, but often fail. We think, oh, we do a partnership, and then we come up with a set of solutions, and then we'll survive. But that is this modernistic hope. Because if you boil that down, it is again one single solution. These processes are a constant dynamic, and I think embracing that constant dynamism is going to be key. You have to manage a million things at the same time, always, not once and then get over it. No, it's always. Complexity doesn't go away because you embrace it. No, complexity is providing you the opportunities, but being able to manage complexity means that you have to accept it. It's not that you think by saying, oh, it's complex, then all of a sudden it doesn't bother me anymore. No, it's every day. A zillion partnerships, every day a reinvention. It's every day the rethinking of these mechanisms. It's not because you do it once, it's done. It's not that you bring salvation with such an approach. No, the approach, you could say, builds this foundation where you can manage that complexity and be able to deal with it, but it's not done then. So I think that is the misunderstanding of when we all say, oh, we embrace complexity. Oh, nice, it's over. No, it's there. Eh? Celebrate it. And that complexity is exactly what we need. And it will go all over the place. And half of the times we have a hard time how to deal with it, but it's fine. That's okay. It's the reality that we actually have to celebrate, more or less. It's
Sure.
also amazing, especially when you bring a design approach there. It's like you create this constant laboratory, not a laboratory for one solution and then stop. No, a constant laboratory. And I think that the consistency and the continuity compared with the commitment to stick to that are key. And I think that is, as I learned in my diplomacy work in often conflict zones, consistency, continuity, and commitment in the places where everything falls apart, everything every day falls apart, is key, because you have a foundation. Every day you land the dust. Every day you land your different interests. Every day you perhaps have to start all over again, but the consistency of your approach builds that foundation that things change, that alternative matters.
Yeah, I like that a lot, especially the idea of Nusantara as a laboratory. Let's wrap up based on one of these three questions. Allow me to rephrase them a little bit. The first one relates to the idea of overpopulation, or rather maybe a concentration of people in one spot and resources in another, which kind of cheekily allows me to ask you a question about the very premise of Nusantara, which of course is relocating the capital away from a place of extreme density, Jakarta, and trying to de-densify and redistribute economic opportunity to very distant locales such as Kalimantan. Do you even, it is rather crude in its essence, it's a rather crude solution. Do you kind of subscribe to that kind of approach?
Can you help me understand the question better? Is that the fact that
the very basic premise of Nusantara is to build a new capital of 2 to 3 million, which should then decongest. It's a narrative very common now in Asia. We were going to build a new kind of dream place here, and that's going to kind of alleviate pressure from this very kind of rickety urban setting there. And I personally feel that as a correlation that doesn't really exist. Building in virtual isolation is also very, very risky and difficult. But we're doing it, it's happening, and you know, the train has left the station. So we're in that process, and it is a laboratory in that sense. And interestingly, the government is very open about the experimental nature of this city. So I'm just curious. I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I think the city will not reduce pressure on the urbanity or the development of Indonesia, but it will present an alternative, and I think this is where the opportunity lies. And because of the scale, the alternative will have impact. It is beyond the laboratory, because the laboratory, you could say, you scale down. Nusantara is the opposite, is like the inverse of that laboratory, because you scale up. So there is a massive opportunity to have impact. Second, the learning from the development, like a constant learning from that. So the validation, evaluation, the transparency and accountability part, which is not so much political, but more focused on learning. If done right, Nusantara helps us as a world understand how that alternative works. And if that has a feedback loop into policy, regulation, development, financing, validation, and evaluation, all of a sudden it has a ripple effect across every other dollar spent across Indonesia and across Asia and across the world. So I think there is the impact goes way beyond the fact that you're building an alternative place, but it doesn't all of a sudden alleviate pressure on the rest of Indonesia. Therefore, the scale is just, which is fine. I think that is, for me, not the attractiveness of Nusantara, but the fact that we're reinventing the future in real time and at scale, and that reinventing the future brings the massive opportunity to change our policies, our practices, our validation and evaluation models. Also because, and I think this is interesting, even perhaps more interesting, is that Nusantara is while it's an Indonesia capital and developed with and for and by Indonesia, it's also an international effort. And because of that global impact is way, way larger. Every involvement of any donor, investor, or partner from across the world will help change the world, will at least have the opportunity to inform that change globally. So I think, no, alleviation, I don't, that the scale is lacking for that. Impact, yes, beyond anything in policy and regulations and evaluation and validation in governance, in partnerships and approaches from Indonesia to the world and back again. And I think this is where these international links are going to be of critical importance on how does our money work and where does it go to? And how can design and a design-led approach that is holistic, future-oriented and focused on those principles that we so much value is literally informing an alternative. I think in that sense, it's super relevant. But if we don't do that, then it just becomes not an alternative, but a next, replication of the past. And I think this is where the responsibility and the opportunities come together. The responsibility is that Nusantara is anchored in the future, not the past. The opportunity is that it is anchored in that future and that the lessons help us redraft our policies, our frameworks, our regulations and validation models. And I think this is where we can learn massive amounts of.
Yeah, I love this idea of the ripple effect. I think that will, literally resonate here. We've taken more time than we've agreed with you. Allow me to finish on the final, rather practical question. The mission for this competition is a weird, unique, new hybrid of urban, forest, and agriculture in a new mixture. And in the outline of the competition, we're quite clear that that's unique and maybe not even necessarily possible with a lot of challenges. The question that I read here is related to the technical side. Like for such an agro-urban landscape, relating to the point you raised about evaporation, do you see for Nusantara a more technocratic approach along the lines of Holland, which is hyper-productive but also hyper-technical, or a much more low-tech approach? And how could we envision that for the future? Sorry, it's a bit vague, but that.
No. I think also reading the question, I think where you're heading, I think, and I have to perhaps disappoint you, but I think it's a combination. There is no either or. Technology is our future, but by itself it's stupid. Low tech doesn't bring us to the next century. It's always a combination. It is based on the values. If high and low tech are based in the same values, they can strengthen one another. But if high tech is as in the past, like this modernistic approach, if tech is grounded in modernism and the validation and evaluations that come with it, it's increasing our vulnerability and stupidity. And if low tech is grounded in our values, then it creates an alternative that doesn't resonate politically. So it's the foundation of where we anchor high and low tech in, that is what's bringing us together. And I think this is where that holistic approach that is key to the Nusantara future will be able to bridge the gap between low and high tech. They need each other for a future that we all want. But it's not either or. There's no way we will be able to reinvent the future without exploiting every high and low tech capacity that we have. But it's the question of the valuation and the governance of those, you could say, technologies that is key. And then for water, it's the same. We need all of that. And there are questions on more on Africa and other places, and more on the industrial side. Yeah, there are massive opportunities for reduce, reuse, and recycling across the world. We will need them all. But if we present them in the same stupidity as we presented former infrastructure, they will fail, because we won't change the way we deal with water and our natural resources. They won't be able to value our social and inclusive needs. They won't be able to literally tap into the future orientation of our society and economy. So they will fail. So I think it's the mission-oriented, value-based approach that can anchor low and high tech in this very holistic manner, as long as we have those values right.
Values is key. I think that's a great point to end it. But Henk, that was extremely insightful, and honestly, as one of the pre-last in the whole series, I think it really offers a missing piece of the puzzle for the larger narrative and for the people that are doing the competition. So I really want to thank you again. Maybe Prof. Rabik, you can do the formal wrap-up.
No, it's not really a formal wrap-up. Just would like to take the opportunity to say again, thank you very much to you, Henk. I really appreciate. I always impressed with your lectures and your ideas. So really happy to have another opportunity to follow one of your lecture. And to participants who are still joining us here, we also record this, Henk, for your information, so everybody can always follow the presentation. And we upload it in our competition website and also our department website. And yeah, last but not least, I would like to remind everybody that we still have another lecture series, 2 lecture series here in the following weeks. Next week will be from the Joris van Etten from the ADB, and I hope to meet all the participants here again next week. Thank you again, Henk, and thank you also, Neville, to keep the conversations and the discussions very interesting for all of us. Okay, so we can end up the session tonight.
Thank you so much, Wiwi and Neville, and thank you all, and good luck. Look forward to follow-up conversations. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Take care for you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Everybody.